crisscrossing the country, desperate to win the hearts and minds of South Africans. For now, politicians are at the mercy of voters who hold the keys to install or boot them out of power. But post-elections, manifesto promises are set to take a backseat as political parties use their vote to bargain for power in often questionable coalitions. Has the country learned lessons from the recently failed coalition arrangements?
The DA had this arrogance of being the government. The DA actually not expecting me to treat the other coalition partners as like kind of junior partners.
That was a very unstable, unsavory, and actually perplexing but confusing political turmoil that came from political hell.
There's a saying that says, my enemy's enemy must be my friend. That doesn't work in coalition governments.
This episode revisits an earlier report about coalition governance and looks beyond November 1's local government elections, which saw a 61.42% hike in hung municipalities in the country. Some say in politics, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. In January 2020, turmoil came to a head at the Tshwane Municipality's Special Council meeting called by opposition parties, the African National Congress and the Economic Freedom Fighters, whose combined votes made the majority votes intended to oust the Speaker and 3 council officials who were deemed sympathetic to the Democratic Alliance. They walked out as their motion failed to win the day, the latest in a string of incidents that destabilized the DA-led coalition government, which ousted the ANC in 2016. The 2016 polls seemed to pour cold water on the reputation of the governing party, following its many years of governance accused of patronage politics and corruption.
Spent most of the day today looking at many of our projections, and I'm quite glad to announce the fact that here in the city of Tshwane, by all our current projections, certainly we will be the largest party, and therefore I want to congratulate the DA for having successfully beat the ANC.
Experience was awful in many ways because it disenfranchised mainly people, the people who voted for us in the past. Remember, the Metro was established in the year 2000. So the ANC had been in power for 16 years.
In its first financial report following the 2016 coalition arrangement, Tshwane achieved only 2 of 13 service delivery and budget improvement targets. In 2019, the city failed to spend 2 billion rand of its budget amid service delivery concerns, including a sustained water crisis in parts of the city. A year earlier, embattled city manager Mjeketsi Musula unsuccessfully tried to defend a 12 billion rand irregular contract with engineering company Glad Africa, a scandal that demonstrated the impact of politics in administration. Throughout this time, the city had at least 3 mayors.
Now, remember, every mayor that came, they came with their own plan and their own budgets and ideas and so on. So,
I also like to pay special tribute and acknowledge the presence of the EFF leadership, Mr. Shivambo, and Mr. Ndlozi. Thank you very much for what you've done for this country.
To many, an acceptance speech full of surprises as South Africa's economic hubs. Then new DA Mayor Herman Mashaba thanks the left-leaning EFF surprise bedfellows, considering the DA's liberalism favoring unimpeded free markets and less state intervention. Initially opposed to Mashaba's appointment as mayor, the DA and EFF had found each other, even though the EFF opted not to be part of the coalition, but a mutually beneficial arrangement as a kingmaker with 30 seats. We caught up with Mashaba, who has since left the DA and is now on a campaign trail for his new political party.
When obviously DA negotiated this arrangement with the EFF, it had nothing to do with me. And I didn't care about the EFF not wanting me. But when the EFF eventually accepted me, you remember on the 22nd of August of 2016, at that first council meeting when I was elected, I was actually quite surprised, taken aback by the support that EFF leadership demonstrated to supporting me.
As new relationships were forged, policy contradictions were apparent due to ideological differences. But it was the EFF with 30 seats that pushed for the insourcing of workers, blocked Mashaba's attempts to raise tariffs too high, and stopped the city from privatizing refuse collection service Pick It Up, among others, to the irritation of the DA's national leadership, which bemoaned the EFF's alleged leftist influence over the mayor.
One of the big complaints we as a party had to deal with all the time was the fact that Herman Mashaba was ignoring the coalition partners and doing deals with the EFF. And the coalition partners would be the last people to find out. The DA caucus would be the last people to find out. So if anyone was arrogant in that coalition, it was Mr. Mashaba himself, who essentially, thinks he's the alpha and omega of every situation.
While Mashaba's mayorship earned him positive reports in some quarters over his increase of the municipality's coffers and going after corrupt officials, observers say the arrangement raised questions over the EFF's commitment to the poor due to their alleged silence, as Mashaba was accused of stirring xenophobic tensions and harassing the poor in the city. Allegations also emerged that the EFF was given control over key appointment processes in the city of Johannesburg and patronage over tenders, which both parties have denied.
We pushed as the EFF, honestly, without us being in power. We've pushed for many things to happen. We can talk today confidently and proudly about the insourced workers in Johannesburg, security guards. We can talk proudly the same about the Tshwane, where we were insourcing security guards. So we had lots of plans that we had for our people in the cities. But obviously with the minimum numbers that we have, we are unable to fulfill all that.
The EFF ended its informal partnership with the DA, both in Tshwane and Johannesburg, in 2019, after the DA refused to give the party mayoral posts.
The only problem with coalitions like that is that you ought to have agreements from the beginning. So our problem is that we are on the extreme left. Majority of the parties are on the extreme right. So we ought to meet each other halfway. So in trying to figure out where is the halfway, that's where you are permanently in negotiations. So if within your 5 years you are busy dragging each other like that, it becomes difficult.
The success of my relationship with the other parties was premised on my approach from day one of showing respect to all the parties. And I find it totally very strange, literally from day one, that the DA had this arrogance of being the government. The DA actually not expecting me to treat the other coalition partners as like kind of junior partners. For me, this was totally unacceptable.
So I agree completely that you've got to, in a coalition, you've got to be a bridge builder. You've got to be able to bring people together. But Mr. Mashaba certainly does not have a track record in that regard. And I think he's the last person who should be lecturing people around coalition management.
Applause after a bruising electoral battle in what has been described as the end of one-party dominance politics in South Africa. The November 1 local government elections saw hung councils almost tripling. They went from 27 in 2016 to 70 in 2021. And while the ANC secured most votes nationally, its loss of electoral support continues.
In terms of the 213 municipalities that were contested, the African National Congress achieved a majority of 161 municipalities. And the Democratic Alliance achieved a majority of 13 municipalities. And the Inkatha Freedom Party achieved a majority in 10 municipalities. And in 66 municipalities, no party achieved a majority, which are now deemed as hung councils.
Out of 26.1 million registered voters, only 12.3 million made their mark in an election that the Independent Electoral Commission has described as testing. While fewer South Africans traditionally take part in the local polls, the 45.87% national voter turnout was the lowest since 1994. Some believe this is due to voter apathy. Others disagree.
It's not voter apathy. Voter apathy is when people are not really interested in what is actually happening in the electoral system and in electoral processes. But what we have in South Africa, it's actually very active citizenry.
5 of the country's 8 metros had no clear winner, but the ANC, the DA, and the EFF dominated the election scoreboard in 7 of the metros, while New Kid on the Block, Action SA, made it to the top 3 in Johannesburg. Out of the country's 3 major political parties, the Economic Freedom Fighters is the only one that posted growth in seats nationally. Political scientist Professor Susan Boyson says the environment was ripe for the EFF's explosive growth in this election, but its reputation at local government has cost it dearly.
I think the electorate, the voters out there, see the EFF as very good at slogans, at pinpointing what are big problems in South African politics. And yet, this election outcome, no doubt, is an indication that voters do not see the EFF as ready to govern, as qualified enough to govern. We have seen the EFF actually earning itself that reputation in the previous term of especially local government, where they had a very disruptive role in coalition governments, and that they were often on the side of using internal power in ways that are not quite democratic and are not in line with their mandates to get concessions for them and their constituencies. And we actually see the EFF recognizing that shortcoming in its own repertoire, where in its attempted negotiations in the coalition forming game in the last few weeks, they have tried to barter in places to be put in charge of certain municipalities. That was one of the bargaining chips with other political parties. We want to have a municipality where we can actually show that we can govern.
Action SA gained 16% of the votes in the Johannesburg Metro. While the mayoral post initially seemed within the reach of party leader Herman Mashaba, it was not to be. The DA pulled out of multi-party coalition talks where those involved wanted Mashaba to lead the council of the country's richest city.
We had a meeting with the DA on a Friday, Monday with the first council sitting in Johannesburg and in Ekurhuleni, and DA decided to just really drop us on Saturday without even writing to us to tell us that they are pulling out. We've learned an experience.
While this decision threatened to collapse the multi-party talks, to the surprise and shock of many, including the DA, Mashaba withdrew his mayoral candidacy in Johannesburg. His party banded together with the EFF and supported the DA's mayoral candidates in Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and the city of Joburg.
They extracted no concessions from us, and they will get none. What this means is that these governments could very well be short-lived.
This has raised the ire of those who hoped that Mashaba would take the mayoral chain and continue the project of chasing undocumented migrants from South Africa's economic hub. A controversial move that drew a lot of criticism during his mayorship between 2016 and 2019.
This move was actually to protect South Africa, was to protect these metros being taken over by the ANC, I'm sorry. As you are aware of the damage ANC has caused this country over the last 27 years, there was just no way us as Section SA we are going to allow the DA to give this municipality to the ANC, because the way they pulled out of our negotiations plans at the last minute. Obviously, I think you look at the numbers. So basically, if we are going to be voting as individual organizations, ANC was going to ultimately take over these 3 municipalities.
He certainly put himself into the big game with a view to 2024, the provincial and national elections there. And he would have to play it very strategically around every corner because he has a lot of credibility at stake. And I think for both the EFF and Action SA, they will also have to show that they can really play that big political game convincingly, and that they were not just using these municipal level tricks, strategies, maneuvering to quickly put the DA in a very uncomfortable position and to quickly have revenge on the ANC.
The Freedom Front Plus is the DA's coalition partner in the Tshwane Metro. The party facilitated the talks, which the DA pulled out of at the last minute. We spoke to its election head, Voter Wessels, on why it still supported DA candidates despite them having left the multi-party talks high and dry.
We made our decision to stick to the DA candidates and to the informed governments where we can form majority coalitions. We did succeed to get the ANC and to keep the ANC out of power, and that was the most important objective. Johannesburg is not a coalition, it's a minority government. It is going to be unstable, and there are going to be problems in terms of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni.
A possibility DA leader John Steenhuisen says they will tackle head on.
We will be vocal about which parties obstructed or frustrated our efforts at good governance and pro-poor governance.
Professor Boyson says now that multi-party coalition governments are in place, some policy sacrifices will have to be made.
These parties, especially the EFF, would also be asked to make sacrifices in terms of the big policy demands that they have been playing with in the coalition formation game over the last few weeks, because those big issues can translate into local issues in many ways, except perhaps some issues of land for occupation or new developments. But I'm sure alternative pieces of land, less controversial ones, can probably be identified to make an interim measure of consensus on land delivery, basic services possible between this diverse group of parties.
In Durban, chaos ensued during the inaugural sitting of the eThekwini Council after ANC supporters stormed the meeting venue amid news that the IFP had decided not to vote with the ANC. That sitting was postponed to midweek, and when it resumed, most South Africans were convinced that the DA had eThekwini in the bag and the governing ANC had lost its stronghold, which has allowed it to lead comfortably over the years.
Hello, yes, I now officially declare Councillor Nkosi Kaunda as the mayor-elect of the city.
However, the tables soon turned. Nkosi Kaunda returned as the executive mayor of the metro. Little consolation to the humiliating defeat South Africa's liberation movement suffered in Gauteng.
We are very grateful to the election of the mayor, and we congratulate Kaunda, but we congratulate the ANC. We also want to thank smaller parties that supported us.
The Nelson Mandela Bay was another wild card. The ANC regained control of the metro by 1 vote following its 2016 historic loss. That's also thanks to smaller parties, including the United Democratic Movement, which ditched the DA in the nick of time.
DA said that their national or their federal council has resolved that they are not moving away from the speaker position and that of the mayor. And we felt that already there was a fallout between the president of the UDM and Helen Zille and Action SA at the national level in those coalition talks. And we spoke with our leaders and said, even here at Nelson Mandela Bay, it seems like the DA doesn't have an autonomy to make any decisions in terms of this, and they are hell-bent on having the speaker. And as a bloc of smaller parties, we said we cannot give the DA absolute power in these municipalities, because that's where you find that smaller parties are being abused and being bullied by parties who have more numbers proportionally.
The ANC agreed to give the bloc what it asked for, and the leader of the newly established Northern Alliance, Gary van Niekerk, was voted as the Speaker of the Council. He says the chaotic days that mark the tenure of the 2016 coalition government in the metro is now history.
There's a different attitude from both sides, and we appreciate that the opposition has come to the party as well. We basically unofficially agreed to have a certain decorum within council. I personally, I've been elected as a speaker to the Speaker of Council, so it's my responsibility as well to keep a level of respect. We know we're being watched by millions. The galleries, we see our youngsters sitting in the galleries. We have to set an example for the rest of South Africa that what happened in the last 5 years is unacceptable.
While political parties position themselves for the 2024 general elections, anger and frustration over years of poor service delivery and corruption continue to simmer. The jury is also out on whether the recently formed coalition arrangements across the country's municipalities will stand the test of time.
I think every South African, and hopefully also the politicians, must know that this is a type of final chance to get local government right. And it will be in all parties' benefit, and they will reap the electoral benefits in future if they can be seen to be making a very constructive contribution now, and not to get involved in new waves of corruption and maladministration.